Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Deep Learning Podcast with Poly AI, the only podcast who, right now, at this very moment, is interviewing Ken So. Very thrilled to have an external guest. I know you hear a lot of insights and some knowledge sharing from folks internal to Poly AI, but we thought, what better individual to bring in than super fan to the AI marketplace in more ways than one, Ken So. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Of course. Why don't you tell us and the listeners at home a little bit about yourself?
Sounds good. So, hello, listeners. So I write a Substack publication called Generational, where I write about AI trends and companies, and where I try to carve out the niches that I focus on really deeply research articles and tend to write long form articles. And I try to write it also from different perspectives. One is I used to be a data scientist, so sometimes I go to coding and projects. But sometimes I put on the BC hat, like look into the stars. And occasionally I put on the more corporate hat, looking at what's happening with large enterprises and public corporations. So I try to blend all of those into generational.
Excellent. How long has Generational been in publication?
For about a year plus, maybe closing 2 years now.
Yeah. And who's your target reader? Who are the folks who are reading Generational on the regular?
Yeah, initially it was targeted towards investors, but now as I look at the reader base, it's really anyone who's AI interested. So I've got founders, I've got operators, I've got engineers, and it's really everyone who's interested in knowing kind of what's the latest in AI and putting in maybe a little bit more of a commercial hat on it.
Interesting. Well, I would have to say anyone who's interested in AI, I think to some extent that includes everyone from a consumer basis, from an enterprise like buyer basis, from an operational excellence basis. Like you said, VCs, a lot of VC dollars going around to AI companies, obviously in this new era of AI proliferation. Um, Maybe we could talk a little bit about the tech and some of your observations. Obviously, because you are so thoroughly researched in the stuff that you put on Generational, you're kind of picking up on a lot of the current trends. We've talked in past episodes about how AI as a concept is not anything that's entirely new. It's been around for decades, but this new wave of AI, kind of ushered in by entities like OpenAI, et cetera, the generative aspect, LLMs, kind of gaining root in consumer utilization. This is what we're sort of referring to when we talk about AI in general. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing with regards to the actual technology itself that you find quite interesting?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest trend, well, maybe a broad theme is just a resetting of consumer expectations um, around what AI can do. And one of those trends is something Poly AI is very much in tune with, which is like the expectation that AI can sound very natural and that
Okay.
you're able to interact with it. I think the past couple of months we've seen releases from Google, from Apple, how they are incorporating AI, and a lot of it is around voice AI into everyday smartphones. And I think that based on the demos I've seen are really impressive, and based on the tech I've been using myself every day, um, it's like become really impressive that even my parents who are very tech averse are now using it. So there's a massive user expectations of what AI can do. And now everyone kind of just expects it. So I think that's really interesting because once consumer expectations reset, you'll see accelerated adoption of a lot of different new applications people are going to build. The other thing, I'm not sure if Waymo is in Boston yet or, wherever around the world, the Poly AI team is, but in San Francisco where I live, that's kind of my default, um, mode of transportation now, except for my own car. Like people are so
Really?
accustomed now to taking Waymo. Like the first ride is always kind of scary. Uh, and, but
Giving Total Recall vibes with Johnny Cab talking to you from the front seat, except there is no Johnny Cab. Yeah, I feel you.
that's right. But after that, you just get used to it. Like you think it's safe enough. And actually, when you look at the statistics, it's actually much safer than the human driver.
Yeah.
So you just get used to it. And again, consumer it's resetting the expectation of what AI can do. Now, that's voice AI, that's visual AI. There's a lot of different things, but for the average consumer, that's all AI. And
Right.
I think it's an exciting time from what I'm seeing as an end user about this. But that's just kind of one aspect of the trend I'm seeing.
I mean, the root there is that we're still talking about functional machine learning and interpretation of data. rapidly and then processing data so rapidly that it operates as almost in a human brain like function. So that sort of computing power, whether you call it artificial intelligence or you call it something else, that is to your point what the consumers are sort of in touch with. Michelle Schroeder, who's our senior vice president of marketing here at PolyAI, and I did an episode a couple weeks back of the podcast where we discussed automation in real life and some of those examples that help to normalize the concept of what is possible with modern day machine learning and language models. And to your point, like on an omni-channel basis, right? Whether it's um, uh, visual or it's automotive, even in mechanical. It's crazy to see how these processes can be automated so fluidly and so smartly. Um,
Yeah.
what about when we're taking a look at like LLMs or we're talking about enterprise utilization of AI these days? What do you see as being some key trends and technological like digging in that are happening more or less in the weeds itself?
Yeah. I think in the weeds itself, there's this, I mean, broadly RAG is still on trend. I think
Okay,
there's
yeah,
kind of RAG that's becoming more on trend, which is the infusion of knowledge graphs into whatever you retrieve. And for the listeners, knowledge graph can out of like relationships between different entities. So for
sure,
example, Damien and I are humans, but Damien is connected to the poly I entity. And so once you have this kind of like data that's connected to each other in a logical way, and now you're using that kind of data as the basis to answer questions whenever you have a Q&A bot that uses RAG. And the difference really from before last year, it's all about document or vector RAG, um, which is translating raw text into some arbitrary numbers and then using that as a retrieval. So that's kind of one thing that's become very on trend right now. Um, so I'll pause there.
So,
Maybe,
just so I better understand. So, when you're saying vector based, it's more linear, right? It's there's only one pathway that you can follow when you're utilizing RAG in a certain application, and that is you get this text contextually. We're interpreting this intent. Let's put it in the voice space. It goes here, 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 here. That's when you take the retrieval piece, sort of traditional conversational AI. Again, putting it in our sphere. But with knowledge graphs, it has more of this nebulous, three-dimensional. It could go this way, it could go that way, it could go over here because of that complex web of connections that exist between the subject matter at hand. Is that close?
yes, yes. I think another aspect of it is like when we look at our, say, work documents, we can use a term that's used in many different contexts. And
Hmm.
for vector RAG, they look at that. There might be some differences in the actual representation, but the AI might get confused because they all use the same word to mean something. But
Sure.
when the knowledge graphs, ideally, the situation is like you actually are able to parse out the difference. Say maybe poly AI could mean company in one context, in another context it means a project or a specific feature.
Oh,
Kind of
cool.
out the different kind of aspects of a certain term. So that when you do RAG, it's able to understand better what you're trying to say and link it to what the knowledge has.
That's pretty. So it's contextualization amplified.
Yeah, that's right.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. All right. So consumer adoption, obviously looking at a knowledge graph, heightened RAG as being trends. What about business adoption and application? What are you seeing with regards to business utilization of AI these days? Where are the focus areas? Where do people who are in buying decisions and end user organizations looking to implement? Are they building? Are they buying? What are some of the trends that you see with regards to business adoption?
Yeah. Business adoption, probably we can bucket it in two ways. One is internal adoption of tool for employee use, and the other is like adoption of it for building AI powered products. I think on the internal side, actually businesses are more conservative when it comes to adopting versus when they're actually infusing AI into building products that they can sell. I think a lot of it is
Sure.
like still a couple of different things. I think one, the usual hesitancy of is this is a new technology, how safe it is, and so on. Second is like there's also the, I guess, depressed buying demand from just the overall macro sentiment. There is a trend towards software consolidation as well. So a lot of this budgetary constraints new technology, security concerns all kind of blend into kind of slowing down the adoption of AI tools within companies. That said, surveys show even though there's no kind of officially endorsed tool inside the company, most companies still, I mean, most employees use their own tool on the side. They just don't tell the I think that just goes to show how useful these tools are. Like,
Right.
yeah, the company won't pay for it, doesn't endorse it, but we as individual employees might be willing to pay for it and use it. Which is an extra step of like, hey, that shows how much value there is. When it comes to the other bucket of like infusing AI into products, I think there's increased competition. Like when I track the market, well, I guess the market, let's maybe even bucket it in further, big tech companies and kind of private companies, smaller startups, they're just releasing AI features left and right. I think there's
Yeah.
this competition to be the first one. And I think part of it is like, there's the dynamic of like, if you're the first one, you get more distribution, you get more data, once you have more data, you would lock in the customers more and are able to train your models better, get better user experience. So there's a lot of like race to the first. I think
Right.
there's a lot of this race because the pie is perception of how big the price is really huge. OpenAI, for example, has reported they have currently, or as of June, 3.4 billion in annualized revenue, making
Mhm.
them the fastest growing company, the software company ever. So when people see that, and when especially product managers or CEOs see that, wow, they can grow this company like 3.4 billion in 2 years, they're going to invest everything to try and take that price.
And it's not fatty like, call it what you will. There's going to be lovers and haters, but like cryptocurrency, it's not going that same route where it could be a flash in the pan. We're talking about a transformational technology that's akin to moving things to the cloud, 20 years ago. That now that's sort of the next generation of what's to be expected. How does that coincide? And I'm having a hard time, I guess, um, uh, merging the sentiment from large enterprise with regards to tentative adoption of these, edge tech and edge tools versus the fact that there is this race among startups and top tier tech companies to provide first and allegedly best in class solutions. How are those things coalescing?
I think those are coalescing and investors or the public market investors being a little bit more cautious about it, the prospects of um, companies growing more because of the new AI products. They're beginning to
Okay.
see, oh, enterprises are adopting new AI products more slower. And hence, maybe we should discount the potential growth rates or future growth rates of these companies. So I think over the past couple of months, you've generally seen a depression in valuation multiples, reflecting the concerns of public market investors. And I think you probably won't see in the overall stats, but once you break down the stats in the benchmark, that's also reflected in the data wherein um, the average, there's probably less deals overall um, on the AI side, and
But the
you're,
deals are bigger.
but the deals are bigger. So
Yeah.
actually, most of the AI funding is concentrated at the top. I think in Q2, for the numbers right, there was around 23 billion of funding went into private companies on the AI side. Six
Mhm.
billion of that go to XAI. So 25%, more than 25% went to one.
Wow. I mean, that's wild. Although we did get a slice of that pie, right? In Q2 where we announced
We're
our
a big
Series
part of
Cs.
that driving.
Little dust off the shoulders here, go us.
Yeah.
No, but well, let's move from the public market investors to the VCs. Let's expound a little bit on that. So you already just mentioned that there were fewer investments made, but they were made in large, or they were made on a tighter pod or a tighter pool of private companies. Um, why is that? Is it just the general buzziness and busyness? Is it the emergence, or at least that temporary, I hope temporary emergence of wrapper companies that were simply putting a user interface on publicly available tools or open source models like ChatGPT and calling it a product? has that sort of chaff been separated from the wheat at this point? What are we going to see from VCs from now on moving forward in this space?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the wrapper conversation for sure. I
Okay,
think that kind of phase has passed where we kind of know VCs won't invest in wrapper companies anymore. The different thing that I've been hearing, or the different term I've been hearing nowadays from VC folks I talk to, is that there's a lot of sameness. There's even
sure.
more so like 20, 30 companies tackling a very specific niche. Um, all brilliant founders, but I think the market isn't ready yet to kind of digest 20, 30 companies doing the same thing. I
Right.
think so when you see 20 to 30, when VCs see 20 to 30 companies tackling the same problem, that gives them pause of like, hey, what am I missing here? How competitive is this space going to be? So you see that reflected in the slowness in deals. Um, I think those are the one top of mind of like, hey, what VCs are seeing when it comes to AI deals.
Would you see that as being sort of indicative of a lot of SaaS companies in general, though? I mean, are we talking about just a general commoditization of that industry itself? And if so, how does this differ? Or does it just sort of fall in line and will the leaders soon emerge?
Yeah, I think in some sense it will follow the remote work software trend we had in COVID, where a
Sure.
lot of remote software companies raised a lot of money, and then when the remote work kind of died down and became commoditized, a
Hmm.
lot of them are kind of figuring out what next steps are. I figure out, at least talking to a lot of VC friends and other investors and strategic buyers, is like they're seeing a lot of these AI startups coming to market as well. Was like, hey, they can't gain traction. Brilliant team, brilliant tech, but they can't get any traction, and they're starting to and fold and figure out what the next steps are. The difference though is like the at the top end of AI startups and private companies, they get billions. So
Right.
it will probably last much longer. But when you remove the top 1%, you'll see a lot of the same trends that we've seen in remote software companies.
I mean, when we're talking about like building their own models and trying to stay competitive to fuel this like next generation of products and services that are built upon their models, obviously you look at the big five and it's a constant headline race to your point about who built the next biggest model, who's outperforming who on the, if dashboard or whatever it is, like the big scoreboard that gauges performance against each other. But ultimately, what about those startups? What I'm hearing, and a lot of the reason that people talk to us is not just because PolyAI has an exquisite product and a really great voice or whatever, but it's because they feel as though their existing monolithic provider who has things like a CCAS suite or something like that, just isn't really paying much attention to that function, that very niche function within that massive ecosystem. And so it feels like an afterthought. So where you were saying before, the trend is to sort of streamline your number of vendors and bring it down to as narrow and as refined a stack as possible. That it seems like there's a really good opportunity for differentiated, niche solution providers. Would you agree to that statement, or do you think that maybe things are changing?
Um, I think that's a good question, and I think it's probably too early to tell yet. I
Okay.
do tend to think what I'm seeing right now is like software consolidation will continue, or like people would like to keep the status quo, so they'll probably stick with their vendors and just existing vendors, and push their existing investors to just implement it within the existing software stack.
Sure.
Um, there will there be a set of niche AI applications? I think so. I would think so more though on the consumer side than on the B2B software side.
Okay.
Because on the consumer side, you'll see a lot of these really rapidly growing consumer apps on mobile app stores, okay,
Yeah.
in the space and stuff. So you see a lot of these niches because it's really easy to adopt, really easy to switch between one app to another. So it's really good. But when it comes to B2B software buying, enterprises just want to minimize change as much as possible.
That's
They
true.
are going to ask, like, can you build this AI feature for us?
I almost would want to challenge though, because it seems like, going back to those top 5 that are building their own models, they're also responsible for a lot of the mobile devices and whatnot that we have. So whereas, you have sort of a niche function or a niche app that could roll out on mobile, it's probably going to be superseded by something that's innate to a mobile operating system because that's being like look at Apple Intelligence. So maybe it's moving off of the phone and into those physical devices like the like Rabbit and the Friend. Pretty soon someone's going to hit one that's going to strike gold and actually like fulfill all the promises that marketing puts out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like with Gemini being infused now into a lot of the Google and Android
Right.
ecosystem, and a lot of the features are being just offered off the bat. Like, hey, can you remove this object in the photo background and stuff? I think we're gonna see a lot of these more niche applications maybe go away. I think there's a phenomenon here that's called Sherlocking. Forgot where it come from. Where
Ooh,
just make make the end consumer niche apps vanish because bigger platform, Apple and Google,
right.
just, yeah, that's a default application.
Sherlocking. That's cool. That's a first. I haven't heard that one. I'm gonna look more into Sherlocking. But of course there's the other alternative, right? Which is if the big tech company likes what they see and they don't want to either build something competitive or build something innate, then they're just gobbling it up. So give
Yeah.
us some insights on what you see with regards to merger and acquisition activity happening in this space.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is happening, not so much on the niche application side, but a lot of the big acquisitions are being done by big tech companies on the large foundation model companies. So you see this
Mhm.
with well acquiring, quasi acquiring the AI, which is the trend now, quasi acquiring. So
What's a
Microsoft.
quasi acquisition?
So they effectively acquire the company, but don't do it the usual route and buying the stocks. So they hire away key talent, most of the key research talent. Second is they pay for it via license fees instead, which is really kind of like a cover up because the license terms of those license fees doesn't really make sense, but they pay license fees, which can then be used to pay out the investors. But have to kind of store more there.
Oh, interesting. All right. Well, that sounds fun. A quasi acquisition. So take the talent, buy up all the licensing availability, and kind of maybe even suppress the brand. Slowly just absorb functionality.
Yeah, because I think in the foundation model space, once you hire away the key talent and the key resources, it's effectively kind of like a shell company because to be
Sure.
in the foundation model space, you have to keep building models, having the best researchers and the compute and the money to keep building the latest models. Once you take those away, what happens to the essence of foundation model company? It's effectively acquired away by the big tech company.
Quasi acquisition and Sherlocking. I think I need to write a Kenso dictionary here. That's very, very cool. What else are you seeing in the M&A space? Anything monumental outside of like big quasi acquisitions and maybe just further consolidation at the top?
We're beginning to see strategic buyers outside of the semiconductors and the tech companies acquiring the usual talent and the infrastructure to scale up their AI efforts. We're beginning to see a lot of application, more B2B software companies acquire talent, acquire companies as well. Traditional acquisitions, not quasi acquisitions.
Okay.
So, for example, if I remember correctly, Canada acquired Leonardo AI. And you're beginning to see this more often as a way to accelerate the AI effort. So that's another trend, but I think it's only now you're beginning to see that. Maybe it's also related to the thing we talked about earlier, like um, it's gonna get harder for a lot of AI startups to kind of gain ground, and they're beginning to think about next steps. And maybe the play of like, hey, bigger private companies want more AI talent, and then a lot of the startups are also willing to consider joining a bigger home.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense. Well, it's exciting. Whatever the future holds, it's going to be fun to be a part of that ride, I'm sure. And I know that you're going to enjoy being not only on the ride itself, but also kind of at the controls, right? You're both the roller coaster aficionado and the operator. I think
That's
that.
roller coaster. Like the past 1 2 years of AI has been like you just have to keep up with it, and but it's been fun. And I'm sure you're on that side as well, and riding roller coaster of it. But I'm excited of what the future holds for the space.
Yeah, no doubt. Ken, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to chat with us and our listeners today. It really means a lot. Hopefully we can have you on again, maybe in another 6 months, so we can talk about how right or wrong we were.
Yeah, we get to do a revisit.
True.
Yeah.
All right, my friend.
Wonder if everything we talked about is wrong. Like, that'll be a good
Yeah,
thing.
that's the best. There'll be flames behind us. There'll be mass destruction, raining cats and dogs. All right. Well, you take care. And for the rest of you, we'll see you next week with another topic and another guest. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank